Cold open. It is February 2nd, 1959. Somewhere in the northern Ural Mountains, 9 experienced hikers set up camp on the slope of a mountain locals call Katabatic. In the language of the indigenous Mansi people, that name means dead mountain. They never made it down. The Dyatlov Pass Incident 9 hikers. 1 tent, 0 explanations. ACT-11. Who were they? Before we talk about how they died, we need to understand who they were, because this is not a story about reckless amateurs. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute. He was known as one of the most skilled young mountaineers in the region. He had designed his own radio equipment. He made his own gear. This was not his first winter expedition. The others, Zenaida Kolmogorova, 22, Rustem Slobodin, 23, Yuri Doroshenko, 21, Georgy Krivonishenko, 24, Alexander Zolotarev, 38, the eldest, a veteran hiker, Ludmila Dubinina, 20, one of the most experienced female mountaineers in the region, Alexander Kolovatov, 25, and Nikolai Thibaut Brignolel, 23. 9 people, all in their prime, all highly trained for exactly this kind of expedition. Their goal was to reach Otterten Mountain, a Category 3 hiking route, the most difficult classification in Soviet sport. They planned to complete it in 16 days and return to civilization by February 12th. The journey began on January 27th. They had skis, proper cold weather gear, tents rated for extreme temperatures. They had done this before. We actually have their journals and their cameras, dozens of photographs from the expedition documenting everything up until February 1st. After that, nothing. AC-2, the last known day. On February 1st, the group made a decision that, in hindsight, seems strange. Bad weather had pushed them slightly off course. They were tired. By late afternoon, they were on the exposed slope of Katabatic, not their intended campsite. The smart move would have been to descend back into the tree line, where there was shelter and firewood. Instead, they pitched their tent on the open slope. Why? We don't know for certain. One theory, Dyatlov wanted to practice camping in exposed alpine conditions, a skill useful for the next day's push. He wrote a cheerful entry in the group journal that evening. No signs of distress. They had dinner. They made jokes. Someone wrote a fake newspaper called the Evening Otterten. It was sarcastic. It was funny. These were happy people. Then they went to sleep. What happened next, sometime in the early hours of February 2nd, is the question that has haunted investigators, scientists, and historians for over 60 years. And the answer, depending on who you ask, is either almost figured out or completely beyond our understanding. ACT-3. What they found. When the group failed to return by February 12th, nobody immediately panicked. Expeditions run late. Weather delays happen. But by February 20th, families were alarmed. Search and rescue teams were dispatched. On February 26th, searchers found the tent. What they found made no sense. The tent was still standing. Their equipment was inside. Their food, their boots, their warm coats. But the tent had been cut open from the inside. Not torn open by wind, not ripped by an animal, cut deliberately from the inside, as if the occupants needed to exit urgently and couldn't reach the door. All 9 had left, in socks or in single boots, in their underwear in some cases, in temperatures that were, that night, somewhere between -25 and -30 degrees Celsius. At those temperatures, exposed skin can develop frostbite in under 10 minutes. A person without proper clothing would lose consciousness within an hour. Without shelter, they would be dead. Whatever made 9 experienced, rational people cut open their tent and run into a blizzard, barefoot, half-dressed. They clearly believed staying inside was more dangerous. Searchers followed the footprints. The first 2 bodies were found at the tree line, 1.5 kilometers from the tent. Krivonishenko and Doroshenko. They were at the base of a large cedar tree. There were broken branches high up, evidence someone had climbed it, possibly to look for something, or someone. There had been a fire, small, insufficient. They had tried to stay warm and failed. 3 more bodies were found between the cedar tree and the tent. Dyatlov, Slobodin, Kolmogorova, scattered along the slope, as if they had died trying to make it back. Their positions suggested they were moving toward the tent when they died, not away from it. The remaining 4 were not found until May, buried under 4 meters of snow in a ravine 75 meters from the cedar tree. And this is where the case stops being strange and starts being something else entirely. ACID 4. The injuries. The first 5 victims, the ones found quickly, showed signs of hypothermia, terrible but explainable. They fled their tent, couldn't make it to shelter, and froze. The last 4 were different. Dubinina, Zolotarev, Thibaut Brignolel, and Kolovatov had injuries that the lead forensic investigator at the time described as, and I want to quote this directly, equal to the force of a car crash. Thibaut Brignolel had massive skull fractures, not on the surface of the skull and inside it, the kind of fracture that happens when pressure is applied to the whole head simultaneously, not from a single blow. Dubinina and Zolotarev had multiple broken ribs, but no external bruising. In forensic medicine, this pattern is known as a barotrauma injury. The body absorbs an enormous shock wave. The bones break, but the skin, which is flexible, does not. There was something else about Dubinina. Her tongue, lips, and parts of her face were missing. The official Soviet report attributed this to natural decomposition. The body had been submerged in a stream for months. Many forensic scientists since have agreed this is the most likely explanation, but it has never been conclusively proven, and it has never stopped being the detail people remember. One more thing. The Soviet medical examiner tested the clothing of several victims for radioactivity. 2 of them, Krivonyshenko and Kolovatov, showed elevated radiation levels on their clothing. Not dangerous levels, but above baseline. Unexplained. Never conclusively accounted for. The Soviet government closed the investigation in May 1959. The official cause of death, an unknown compelling force. That is a direct quote from an official Soviet government document. ACID 5. The theories. Every decade or so, someone announces they've solved Dyatlov, and every time the solution creates new problems. Let's go through the serious scientific theories, the ones that have actually been peer-reviewed or investigated by official bodies. Theory 1. Avalanche. In 2021, a study published in the journal Communications, Earth and Environment presented a compelling avalanche model. Researchers from Switzerland, avalanche experts, used computer simulations to show how a delayed slab avalanche could have struck the tent at an unusual angle, causing the specific injury pattern found on the victims with crushed ribs and skull fractures. This is currently the most scientifically credible theory. It explains the traumatic injuries. It explains why the tent was cut from inside, they were partially buried, and needed to get out fast. But, and this is important, it doesn't explain everything. The slope where the tent was pitched has an angle of approximately 23 degrees. Most avalanches require a minimum of 30 degrees to initiate. The Russians chose that spot precisely because it appeared safe. And if there was an avalanche large enough to cause those injuries, why was the tent still mostly standing when searchers arrived weeks later? Theory 2. Infrasound panic. This theory is genuinely fascinating and far more scientifically grounded than it sounds. Infrasound is sound below the frequency of human hearing, below 20 hertz. You can't hear it, but your body can feel it. And at certain frequencies, specifically around 18-19 hertz, infrasound has been shown in controlled experiments to cause disorientation, anxiety, extreme panic, and in some cases, visual hallucinations. Some researchers have proposed that the specific topography of the Dyatlov Pass, the mountain shape, the valley geometry, the wind patterns that night, could have created a standing wave of infrasound strong enough to cause a group panic response. It would explain why 9 trained, experienced people made a decision that objectively made no sense. They couldn't think clearly. They were being physiologically overwhelmed by a sound they couldn't hear. The problem, this has never been definitively measured or reproduced at that location. It remains a hypothesis, a compelling one, but unproven. Theory 3. Sudden katabatic wind event. Katabatic winds, also called downslope winds, occur when cold, dense air flows rapidly down a mountain slope. In extreme cases, they can reach speeds of over 200 kilometers per hour. They arrive with almost no warning. In polar and subpolar regions, they are well documented and extremely dangerous. A sudden katabatic event could explain the urgency of the evacuation. A wall of wind, air pressure so intense it felt like the tent would be destroyed. It could also explain the blunt force injuries, bodies thrown against rocks or hard-packed snow by wind velocity. The problem, katabatic events don't create the specific internal injury pattern observed, particularly the skull fracture on Thibaut Brignolel, which pathologists described as requiring focused, concentrated force. Theory 4. Military involvement, the radiation, the classified Soviet files, some of which were not released until 2019, the unknown compelling force language in an official document, the fact that the area was closed to hikers for 3 years after the incident. The military theory adroit that the group stumbled into a weapons test, either an experimental parachute mine or an early thermobaric weapon, has circulated since the 1990s. Thermobaric weapons, also called fuel-air explosives, work by creating a pressure wave, a shock wave, that crushes internal organs without necessarily damaging the skin surface. This would match the injury pattern exactly. The problem, no physical evidence of ordnance was ever found. The radiation levels, while elevated, are consistent with ordinary environmental contamination. Some of the hikers worked in environments with radioactive materials as part of their engineering studies. And the Soviet military, despite extraordinary documentation of the era, has never been shown to have operated in that specific area on that specific night. Acti 6. What science says now. In 2019, Russia reopened the official investigation. After 2 years, they concluded avalanche, combined with extreme low visibility blizzard conditions. Most mainstream forensic scientists accept this as the most probable explanation. But most probable is not the same as proven. Here's what we actually know for certain. 1. 9 experienced hikers cut open their tent and fled into extreme cold without adequate clothing. 2. 5 died of hypothermia. 4 died of injuries consistent with massive blunt force trauma, with no external bruising. 3. 2 had elevated radiation on their clothing. The source was never identified. 4. The Soviet government used the phrase unknown compelling force in an official closing document, and then classified related files for 60 years. 5. The mountain is still there, still called Dead Mountain, and no one has ever camped on that slope again. Outro, the open ending. Here's the uncomfortable truth about the Dyatlov Pass Incident. We have better forensic tools now than in 1959. We have satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, atmospheric modeling. We have declassified Soviet files. We have peer-reviewed papers in respected journals. And we still cannot say, with certainty, what happened on that slope on the night of February 1st, 1959. The avalanche theory is compelling. It is probably right. Probably is doing a lot of work in that sentence. What we know for sure is this. 9 intelligent, trained, experienced human beings made a decision that night that got them all killed. And whatever forced that decision, whether it was snow, wind, sound, pressure, or something we haven't thought of yet, it was powerful enough to override every instinct for survival they had. Igor Dyatlov was 23. The mountain doesn't have answers. It just has snow. If you think you know what happened, the comment section is below. 60 years of arguments haven't settled it yet. Maybe you'll be the one.